This is a tier list for OB49, where I'm going to explain my thoughts on each champion and try to elaborate where I think they belong in competitive play, in esports play, but then I'm going to place the champion where I feel that champion belongs in solo queue, casual play, ranked play. So for instance, Skye is going to be very low in a competitive scene, but in higher end casual and ranked games, she might be a little bit better. So she might be B tier instead of a C tier. You feel me? So I'm still going to explain my thoughts where they belong in competitive play, but the end result will be a casual and ranked play. So, for starters, Androxas. Androxas moved from B+ tier a lot higher. He was, I don't want to say he was undervalued or anything, I think he belonged in B+ tier, but with the meta changes, things like, especially like having high ground and having mobility is extremely important. So I'd honestly be willing to say he's a solid S tier now. Like, the way the meta is shaped right now, it's so dependent on having mobility, having characters that can execute plays in a safe way, while also being able to get up on high ground, being able to get control over certain areas, which Androxas is perfect for. That is like Androxas' dream scenario, where you're playing the safe game, you're playing a poke game, and you're getting up on high ground, getting control of areas, being able to 1v1, box people out, basically. That's like Androxas' wet dream. So Androxas is solid S tier. He's going to be picked early, frequently. He's going to be picked into pretty much every game early on, fits into every comp. So Androxas is solid S tier. Barrack moves down to A tier. He's still a good option. Like, he's still a perfectly fine tank, but with the nerfs to him, like the nerf to the McCollough and the Barrack shields actually hurt Barrack a lot harder than it hurt McCollough. For no particular reason. He was good, but now he's just kind of like, he can definitely be good. I think like Fernando, Ruckus, and Barrack are all pretty much in the same area where someone's going to pick McCollough, and then the other three tanks are going to be distributed to the other team, to like whatever team picks them, basically. There's not a high priority on them. Basically, it's going to be two teams have two tanks. One's going to have McCollough, and one team's going to have like two other tanks. So I'd say Barrack solid A tier now. He can be picked, he can be played just fine, all good. Bomb King stays the same in my opinion. It's just like the Androxas. He's great at area control. He's great at going in, going out really quickly. He has the mobility that's necessary to do that. He can fight anyone individually and make sure that he's holding certain areas. So Bomb King is definitely great for that. And not only that, he can also do a lot of burst damage if need be on tanks and on supports. Buck, I feel like Buck is probably A+ tier now. I think while Buck has limitations, I think he, similar to Androxas and Bomb King, he serves the meta very well. He can go in and out consistently, which is, again, the main part of the meta right now is like getting in and out and in and out. In competitive play, I'd say maybe he's a little bit weaker in competitive play just because it's a lot easier to kill him. It's a lot easier to focus him down. But definitely in casual play, he's definitely A+ tier. You can do basically whatever you want with him. Like, he has so much control, so much area control. He can 1v1 almost anybody. So Buck's a solid A+ tier, I'd say. Cassie, I think, also moves to A+. Cassie, again, like Androxas, like Bomb King, like Buck, she has the mobility that's necessary. She definitely is dependent on the role build right now. I wouldn't say the disengage build suits the meta. Even though there's tanks, there's just so many shields and it's hard to pull off. If you don't get it, then like if you don't get your disengage, then you're just useless until your disengage is up again. So both I think in casual play and competitive play, she fills pretty much the same role, and I think she's A+ tier on both of those. She just fits the meta well. She can go in and out. She can shoulder peek well. She can play a very safe game while still being able to execute targets when necessary. Drogos, I think Drogos can stay A+ tier. He's the one exception to the meta in my opinion. Even though the meta is very much about mobility, getting in and out, shoulder peeking, stuff like that, I think Drogos is still the exception, where he can just sit back and be a backliner. Generally speaking, the backliners are a bit weaker now. You kind of just have control over the game, and backliners aren't really necessary, but Drogos is still, like, he still has the option to go in when needed, and he also has the burst damage that's necessary in a lot of situations. So I think Drogos is probably the exception. He stays an A+. Eevee, I think Eevee can stay A. She's an option for sure. She fits the characters, the characteristics of the meta of going in and out all the time, but she's still a bit too easy to kill in my opinion. I'd rather have a Cassie and Roxas or Buck who can be a bit more safe. They can play the game at their own pace, whereas Eevee's like, you can't do anything from range. You always have to be doing something. You have to go in, you have to go out all the time. There's no situation where you can just be like, well, I'm just going to stand back here and spam, right? That's Drogos' role. That's even Bombkin can do that better. Cassie can do that better. Eevee's like a must-make plays kind of character. So I think she stays in A tier. She's great in certain scenarios, and you can pick her into any scenario, but she's not a high tier pick. I wouldn't prioritize her over other options. So I think Eevee stays A tier. Fernando, I think same thing with Barrack, A tier. Like, one team is probably going to have Fernando. He's going to be picked in most circumstances, but he's not going to be prioritized. He's not going to be picked early or anything. He's just a tank. That's all it really is. He's just like the Barrack. He's just a tank option. So I think he's a solid A tier. Grok, I think Grok honestly probably just stays the same. If anything, he'd maybe go down one tier. I think in casual play, he'd be B+ tier. Like, you can play him and you'll probably do fine, but he's not really a fantastic pick in most situations. In competitive play, I'd say maybe he's even down to B tier, where it's just like there's no reason to really play him. There's no reason to pick him at all unless you like really want to execute a certain strategy or you're really trying to counter pick. Like, let's say they have a Barrack and a Ying. Maybe you really want to get right click value. Or if you're trying to look for CC immunity with the totem, then maybe you could play him, but other than that, there's no reason to pick him. Like, there's really not. In casual play, however, you can still do a lot of damage, and you can still be very valuable with your cauterize spread, with your right clicks, so in casual play and ranked play, I'd say he's probably a B+ tier. Grover, I'd say Grover honestly goes up to B+ tier. He can be up here along with Grok. I think in competitive play, Grover's actually a lot better than he was. Potentially going all the way up to A tier, where it's like you can pretty much fit him in to any comp, but I think it's like just barely on the limit. Like, you can't quite pick him in any situation. There's just a lot of situations because the meta is so established and like so dominant by these mobility characters. I mean, you can see like Roxas, Bomb King, Cassie, Buck, like these are the targets these are the characters that are so important right now. Then having a Grover that can lock them down is actually really good, and he fits so well into that meta. And then not only that, he can also shoulder peek from range. He has a burst heal, which is very useful. Like, he definitely fits into the meta right now. He's just a bit on the weaker end, and I wouldn't just like blind pick him into any scenario. So I wouldn't say he's A tier. Like, I can't just like pick him every single time like I could with a Barrack or Fernando. But he definitely, like, he's on the verge of being A tier. Inara, I still think Inara's B tier. At best, she'd be maybe a B+ tier. Maybe in like casual games. Like in casual games and ranked, this goes for all tanks. In casual games and ranked games, having any tank is it's such an advantage. Like, the more tanks you have, the better. Because like you can just stand on point and just be there forever because it's so hard to focus them down. Like if you're playing a game on Timbermill, I just played a game that on stream like a moment ago, and the Torvald being on point, just being there, is such a nuisance to the teamwork and to like it's so hard to focus him down without communication. So in competitive play, she's definitely very weak. In casual play, I'd still say she's B tier because why ever pick Inara when you can pick one of the other tanks? But she potentially is on the verge of B+ tier, at least in casual and competitive play. In esports and competitive play, she's like really not that great. Kanessa, I'd say probably Kanessa's A tier. I think she's more pickable now than she was before. She's like having a solo backliner. Like, if we're talking having a comp with one tank, two frontline DPS, so let's say Roxas and Bomb King, or Roxas and Eevee or something like that, and then having Kanessa way in the back can definitely be very disruptive for the enemy team. So in competitive play, she's definitely pretty solid. I'd say solid A tier. You can pick her into a lot of different situations. In casuals, it's a little bit harder because you don't always know what you're up against. You don't know if you can rely on your team to keep you safe. But even then, I'd say she's probably A tier because when you get a few pop shots, like just one shot can really change the course of a whole game. Like if you can headshot the Eevee that's blinking you, then that will change the entire course of the game. So I'd say she's A tier. Like you can pick her into most situations. She's not a priority pick though, and if anything, she's just going to be picked last as a we could probably fit a Kanessa in here. So I'd say A tier, pretty solid pick overall. Lex, I think, still stays the same. He's A tier. He's pickable. He's not necessary. It's just like you can play him if need be, and that's fine. That's what A tier is for. Just like the Kanessa, like if you want the Lex, you can pick the Lex, and that's perfectly fine. I'd say Maeve maybe goes up to B tier. It is kind of a meta where a character like Maeve would be good. It's just, again, she's so easy to kill. She's even easier to kill than Eevee. Like, it's so easy to just shut her down entirely. That being said, she still can be somewhat influential, and if we really wanted to go all out, maybe we could say she's B+ tier for casual play. But again, even in casual and ranked play, we're still talking slightly higher end games. In low end games, she can definitely get stuff done. Obviously, like she's S, just like Sky. She would be S tier if we're talking like beginner players. But that goes for anything. If you're a good player playing with beginners, you can carry with any of these champions. If we're talking high-end casual games, high-end ranked games, Maeve really isn't going to get anything done. It's such a risky pick, and even in like the few scenarios where you do get something done with Maeve, it's still such a risky option. Like, why would you ever pick the Maeve instead of an Eevee? Like, Eevee's just the same as Maeve, just less risky. So Maeve, B tier, you can play her if you want. It's kind of at your own cost though. Like, she can be a risky pick for sure. McCollough, I think McCollough probably goes back up to S+ tier. He's gonna be first picked every game, both in casuals, competitive, and esports. It's just like he's just the best tank. He's so influential. Even with the nerfs to him, it's just like he is the best character in the game, and he has been the best character in the game for a long time. It's just his influence goes a little bit up and down. He is just, you have to pick him. You're gonna pick him first every single game. You saw in the tournament he was picked first. I'm pretty damn sure every single game. So there's no doubt he's S+ tier right now. Pip, I think Pip probably moves down. A tier, I think you can pick him when need be. The issue with Pip is that it's actually pretty hard to fit him into comps. He does fit with literally anything. You can play Pip into any single comp you want, but it always feels like you need something else, right? You always get to that last pick and you're like, well, we need a Haven damage dealer, or well, we need someone who can go really deep, like an Eevee or a Buck, or we need a tank, or we need a secondary support. So it's like it's really hard to fit him into a comp. He's a jack of all trades. He can do everything pretty well, but he doesn't excel at one role, which makes it hard to get to your last pick and go, Pip is the best option here. Because very rarely is Pip the best option. He's always a good option for any role, just never the best option. So it's hard to fit him into a comp, and for that reason he's A. You can play him at any time, and especially in casuals and competitive play, like you can pick him at any time, at any point in the comp, and he will be a good pick. But you don't have to, and that's kind of the thing. There's no real reason to. It's just because he's a solid okay. So I'd say Pip A tier right now. Honestly, I think Ruckus probably goes up to A+ tier. I think Ruckus, Fernando, and Barrack are all kind of in the same place, like I mentioned, where you're gonna need a tank. You're gonna pick one of these tanks, if not two. But I think the thing that Ruckus is so good at is that Ruckus is great against the other tanks. Ruckus is probably one of the worst of the tanks against carries and against damage dealers, flankers, anything. But he's so good against other tanks. And when you know that the meta has multiple tanks in it, even if they have one tank or if they have two, Ruckus is very good against those. The only issue with Ruckus is that it's very hard to pull him off as a solo tank. Just having a Ruckus out in the open is not great. But if you can fit him in with another tank, whether that be Barrack or Fernando, like he is your go-to, we need a tank killer. Because he's tanky, he will win every trade. With McCollough, Fernando, or Barrack, he will always win that trade. which is really good for this meta, because there's going to be a lot of Barrack Fernandos and McColloughs. And then, of course, Inara and Torvald, he shits on both of those too. So having Ruckus is always a great option. Usually, I'd probably say he's going to be picked as the second tank after McCollough, and then you'll get a Barrack or Fernando later on if you need it. Alright, Saris. So Saris is new. Obviously, we missed a patch. I think OB48, we missed the tier list, so she was new in that patch, but like perfectly fine to go over now. So, personally speaking, I think Saris is by far the best healer. Okay, well, I don't want to say by far. She, in my eyes, she's like the clear-cut winner, at least. Like, I would rather have Saris than any other healer in every scenario. I always want Saris if I can have Saris. The issue with Saris is that her ult is literally, like, it may as well be the worst ult in the game right now. It is so inconsistent, like 9 out of 10 times it's going to do literally nothing. And at best it's going to pull like 1-2 people maybe. Like, it's so useless, and that's definitely like, that is a big issue. But when we're talking strictly like we need a healer, Saris is the best option. She is 100% the best healer. So I'd put her A+ tier. I would prioritize her over the other healers. Obviously we're going to get to the other healers with Ying and SNEK very soon. But like, as I said, I always want Saris every time I can. And even in casuals and ranked play, she's the best healer because she provides such a presence with the pocket healing. Like, if you can pocket heal, if an Roxas dashes in and there's 3 people looking at him, and you can pocket heal him, that's going to change the game. If they can't kill the person that you're pocket healing, that is going to change the entire game. So it's so impactful, and that's why I always would prefer Saris. If I have the choice between any of the healers, I will always pick Saris. So A+ in my opinion. We'll get to the other 2 healers later on. Shaolin, as I mentioned before, I think the backliners are not as influential anymore. They're not as important. I'd put Shaolin A tier. He can be picked whenever. If you feel like you need a Shaolin, you can pick him. But he's definitely not a priority. Like, I would never prioritize taking a Shaolin over an Roxas, even a Shaolin over a Drogos. It's just like, he's there if you need him. Obviously, it's a little bit confusing because, again, the meta is focused on 2 things. It's tanks and it's these mobility champions, which Shaolin is both very good at dealing with. The issue is that when you have so many of them, it's really hard. Like, yes, Shaolin is one of the better options against a tank. Yes, Shaolin is one of the better options against a Buck or an Eevee. But putting Shaolin against a Fernando, a McCollough, a Buck, and an Eevee, it's just impossible. At best, he's going to get a kill. At best, he'll get 1 lucky stun and get a kill, and then he's going to die. So it's just like, it's really hard to fit him into the meta. But if you see an opening for him and you say, hey, look, I think I can do really good with Shaolin here, he's definitely going to fit well. Obviously speaking, in casual play and ranked play, he could potentially do a lot better because he still is that ranged poke, he is still that consistent damage dealer. But even then, I think it's just like, he's an option, and that's about it. So I'd put him in A tier. I think he's there, he's an option if you really feel like you need it. Sky, still C tier. Fuck Sky, dude. Just don't pick Sky, please. SNEK, I think SNEK stays A+ tier with Saris. This comes down a lot to personal preference. Obviously, I've said that I always want Saris over SNEK, but that's not the case for everybody. Even like Sun Commander, for instance. Sun Commander definitely prefers SNEK over Saris. And there is some personal preference there. And I think SNEK has the better ultimate, which is extremely important, especially in a meta like this, with mobility, with characters that can shoulder peek, heal up a lot, get in and out of fights. Having SNEK ult is really important. And there's definitely teams and players that would prioritize having SNEK over Saris. It's just personal opinion at that point. So I think SNEK A+ tier, a bit worse healing than Saris in my opinion. But he definitely has the really impactful ult, which especially in this meta is extremely important. Torvald, same spot I feel. He's a pocket strategy at best. He could potentially be a bit more useful than expected. In casual and ranked play, as we know, like just like the Inara, he's extremely impactful because he just stands there. But even then, I'd rather have a Fernando. I'd rather have a Barrack that at least does something while they stand there and buy time. So I'd still say Torvald is B tier. In competitive play, he's even worse. He just dies and dies and dies. I'd say he's just B tier. At best, he's played as a pocket strategy. I don't see any other reason to really play him. Tyra, I think, can stay B+ tier. Like, she's an option, more of a pocket strategy than anything. You'll see a few situations where you can say, hey, Tyra might actually be pretty damn good here. And that's okay. Like, that's okay for a character to be. Just like the Grover, where you see she's an alright option. Like, Grover can be a good option here. Let's try it out. And the same thing with Tyra. It's like, Tyra can be good. She just doesn't have the mobility. She just doesn't have anything in her kit to fit the meta, really. At best, she's like, I can kill tanks, and that's great. So I'd say Tyra B+ tier at best. Willow, honestly speaking, this is, again, I'm going to state this. This is my opinion. This is not necessarily the case. This is just my own opinion. I think Willow's A+ tier. I think, honestly, Willow potentially can go up to S+ tier. Or to S tier, I mean, sorry. I think Willow is a great, consistent damage healer. It's very, like, there's no other blaster in the game that is as consistent. Like, she can do so much damage if she's just there. She has such a presence by just standing there. Like, the issue she has is that doesn't have a lot of mobility. She can't move around particularly quickly, even though she has her F and she can jump around quite a bit. It's like, she's very consistent, and as a blaster, having a consistent blast damage is extremely important. Like, it's surprising how much damage she can do. What she struggles with right now is that against an Roxas, who is very good and very prominent in the meta, she can definitely struggle, which is an issue. But and that's the same thing kind of applies to Cassie. She can definitely struggle against Cassie, who's may as well be hit scan at this point. But like, the thing about Willow is that she's so consistent, she's always there. It's very much like a Pip. Pip deals damage in a similar way, where it's like, he's always there, he's always poking you, he's always fucking you up. You don't notice it, but at the end of the day, there's still a Pip there with like practically top damage at the end of the game. And that's kind of what Willow is too. Willow's just like, she's always there, she does a bit more damage than Pip, and then she's just always there, she's surprisingly safe. And she has this kind of mixed play style of, she doesn't have to be backline like a Drogos does, but she's also not frontline like a Bomb King, like jumping in, and she's not jumping in like an Eevee. So I'd say Willow, in my opinion at least, is A+ tier. I think she's a solid pick, and you can do so much consistent damage to her that I'd say she's probably A+. This being said, this could change potentially. The meta is not 100% established, and not enough teams have really tested her out. We didn't really see any play from her in the tournament, so it's a little bit hard to say how she's going to fit in. This is just my initial instinct, how I think she's going to fit in, my initial thoughts. But we'll have to see with the next tier list, and we'll have to see a bit. Victor, I think Victor's still a solid DPS. Like, there's potential for him to go to A+, but as of right now, I think he's still just A. Like, again, we talked about how the backliners aren't as important right now. It's more about having these mobility characters that can go in and out all the time, about shoulder peeking, about stuff like that. The nice thing about Victor is he has the grenades, which is extremely good against these characters that shoulder peek, like Cassie. But overall, it's just like, he's just another DPS option. You can kind of play aggressive, especially at like firefights starting to become an actual option, so you can run around and hip fire people, which does actually kind of make him fit into the meta a little bit. But he's still very vulnerable to the other flankers, which is an issue. Like an Androxus, a Buck, a BK, they can all do really well against the Victor, which is an issue for him. So that's probably the main reason why he's not A+ or higher tier, is that like it's hard for him to deal with the other characters that are good right now. Ying, I think Ying is A tier. Out of the three healers, I would like to have Ying the least. It's still a viable option. Don't get me wrong. It's still a perfectly viable option. And if you prefer playing Ying over SNEK and Saris, then that's great. You can absolutely do that every single time if you want. But overall, just based on her kit, based on everything, it's just she doesn't compare to SNEK and Saris healing-wise, in my opinion. Now, in team play, you can play around having a Ying. Like, you can say, look, we're going to play more defensively, we're going to sit back a bit more, and we can play around the fact that we have a Ying. So, if you have a slightly more coordinated team, I'd say she's probably, like, getting to A+, but in a more casual, competitive, like, ranked setting, where you don't have the proper comms, where you don't have the teamwork for it, then Ying's definitely, like, she definitely doesn't fit the meta, because the meta is, like, I'm going to go in heavy. Like, we're going to have tanks on the point, and we're going to have carries that are running around and doing whatever the fuck they want. And having Ying in that is not great, because Ying's more focused on everybody back up to the same spot. Like, everyone be around the same area so that you get the most out of the Ying illusions. And it's very hard for Ying to keep up with the other carries that are always jumping around and stuff. Whereas Saris and SNEK can definitely keep healing them all the time. So Ying's, like, on the edge between A and A+, but as of right now, with the current meta, with the fact that you don't have perfect teamwork in casuals and ranked play, I'd say that she's probably the worst of the three main healers. In competitive play, there's definitely option for it, but as of right now, I'd say she's probably just A tier. So yeah, that's basically it. Let me move Saris here, and let me move Roxas. So this is the final tier list. Again, this is personal opinion. This is my opinion entirely. You don't have to care at all what I say. This is just what I feel, how I feel about the current meta, how I feel about the champions in the current meta. I explained my reasoning behind each champion. If you don't agree with that, then that's perfectly fine. So yeah, that's it for OB49 tier list. Again, this is for casual and ranked play, but with my thoughts on each champion in a competitive setting as well.